Empezamos. So thank you very much for coming to another seminar. This is the first of this academic course. We have some new things like the coffee and biscuits that we will have every day before half an hour before the seminar. So 11:30, we will have the coffee. So remember to bring your own cups to not generate more waste and yeah, enjoy it. And today is the day of Andrea Antón. I guess that most of you know her. She's a Ramonica Hall researcher here at the Global Change Group. And she was awarded with one of the Maria Maestro Travel Awards to attend a conference. And well, she will be explaining what she's explaining in the conference and also her research. So thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the ecology and impacts of the crab Percnon gibbesi in the Mediterranean Sea. And yeah, it was green. Sí, lo que pasa es que no sé si igual las pilas están bajas porque se pone verde cuando lo enciendo, pero luego se acaba.
Pero aquí me por ahí también. Hay otro.
Aquí hay otro.
Hay otro.
Hay pilas, ¿eh?
Necesitamos haciendo otra, pero no sé, puede estar aquí delante de
¿Este?
¿Has clicado en el tocó primero?
Sí, no, pues estamos en la presentación.
Sí, sí. Vale.
Funciona.
Bueno, puedo utilizar el ratón, ¿no?
Sí.
Hasta aquí, ¿no?
Pues no sé qué es el teclado.
Sería esto, ¿no?
Vale, sí. Para revisar. El anterior va a estar cambiando. Yo más y no.
Bueno, hemos probado el puntero, ¿eh? Antes de la presentación y funcionaba, pero tenía las pilas bajas. Okay, I'm going to switch to English. I'm going to talk about the ecology and impacts of the crab Percnon gibbesi in the Mediterranean Sea. I'm going to try to find my place there. Okay, so this presentation is within the framework of invasive species, which are an actor on the global change. The incidence of exotic species, in this case, is actually represented exotic species, which are species that are translocated to areas beyond their native region, started after the Industrial Revolution, and it has been increasing. It's an increasing problem. And here on the left, maybe the ones that you are on the back cannot see it, but it's represented. Each of these squares indicates a different taxonomic group. This is vascular flats, for instance, and this is birds. And then the color that are these lines with different colors represent different regions. So it's an increasing problem for global and for most groups and most regions, and this translates in an economic impact of about $400 billion per year, as reported in IPBES in 2023. But then when we move to what do we know about invasive species in the marine realm, there's way less information. From the same report, there's only one taxon that includes marine species. This is the case of algae, but they are also clustered with the freshwater algae, so not as extensive data, temporal data sets. And this, maybe. And then this is a global representation of the accumulation of exotic species. Is not very clear, but some areas. So in blue is represented the different marine regions, and some of them, like all of these ones here, they are in white because there's no data, so they cannot paint the data for that type of information in many marine regions. We did a global assessment of the ecological impact of marine exotic species, and I wanted to show this number because we only obtained data for 6% of the species that are actually listed as exotic. So again, very little information. We are missing 94% of the ones that are listed that are not all the ones that are there. And we found an overall negative impact. And moving and zooming a little bit into the Mediterranean, because this presentation is on an invasive species in the Mediterranean. Here in blue, depending on the shade of blue, is a larger number of exotic species. And let's see. A ver. Pero es raro, se ha puesto en...
Sí, creo que se apaga siempre.
Ahora, a veces.
Well, I think I'm going to go with it. Vale. So the Mediterranean is the darkest blue and is the marine area most invaded in the world, with a list of at least 1,200 exotic species. For many reasons, is the most invaded area. And also, if we put in context the Mediterranean Sea with the rest of the regions in the world in this global analysis, when you take into consideration exotic species, but also other factors of global change, such as population density, of increasing sea surface temperatures, the Mediterranean was identified as the regions where most biodiversity will be lost due to exotic species. And also in this paper, we identified 7 regions in the world with the greatest expected biodiversity loss, including exotic species. And 3 of these 7 areas were in the Mediterranean, which are indicated there, underlined. So Fenetos is a researcher that is in Greece, and she has been collecting data, and she has been creating all these tables with this information on the exotic species that are reported in the Mediterranean. And in this publication, she noted that, or reported that there's about 20 species that are introduced in the Mediterranean on average for the past few decades per year. And if we take into consideration that in our global analysis we calculated that about 10% of the exotic species are invasive, which means that are exotic species that have a significant negative impact, whether it's ecological or economical or both things combined. So this is 2 invasive species, 2 species that are going to be a problem per year, and it's hard to keep up with this. It doesn't seem a big number, but we all do science and we know how hard it is to get funding, information, and meaningful data. So I jumped into this project, and the first year when I started my Ramón y Cajal, I was doing surveys, and I wasn't doing surveys on exotic species, but I noticed that there were this crab, the spider crab, in all the places that I was doing research, and they were actually in pretty large numbers. They are all of these kinds that you see here. And some of them, it was like everywhere I was doing surveys and the crabs were passing. And I was very surprised when I went to see what are they doing, what do they feed on, what is their impact, and there was barely any information. So I switched the topic of the Plan Nacional, and I applied for a Plan Nacional to actually study these exotic species that it was funded. So I'm going to present data from that Plan Nacional that has been going on for a little bit less than 2 years. So it's a small crab. Probably most of you have seen it. If you get in the water here, it looks like a big spider, but the carapace width is like 3 centimeters, so not very big. It's also kind of like flat, and it jumps in between the rocks. And this is the habitat. They live in the rocky subtidal from 0 up to 6 meters. They have been reported up to 10 meters, but most of them, they are in between 0 and 4 to 6 meters. This is their distribution based on the literature and the citations. It's Atlantic and Pacific, and it is suspected, but it's actually unknown how it was introduced in the Mediterranean, possibly from the Atlantic. It is suspected that it was related to some sort of shipping transport, whether it is fouling outside of the boat or ballast water, but also we cannot discard marine litter and also maybe the aquarium trade, because it's a species that does really well in aquariums, and it is actually sold currently in the Mediterranean. In some places you can still purchase this crab. I'm going to present this data that is related to Daniel Fuentes' PhD that has an FFA grant related to this project. So in the bottom is a representation of the invasion, and it's a loop. So it goes from 1999 to 24. And then here on the top in the left is the first 2 locations. I don't know if you can see it, but it was in the Canary, in the Balearic Islands reported, and also in Linosa, an island south of Sicily. It was reported for the first time in these 2 places almost simultaneously. These 2 papers came out with like a month or 2 month difference. And the situation in 25 years later is that they cover basically almost all the Mediterranean. So we have calculated the spread rate based on these visualizations and reports on the literature, and their average spread rate, because they didn't move, they didn't spread at the same speed during these 25 years, but the average is 133 kilometers per year, which is quite fast when you compare with other invasive species, and is so far reported in 25 Mediterranean countries. So this is the literature on the species. This is the first year that it was reported in 1999, very few papers before it became invasive. And then there has been more, this is the number of publications. And in blue, it would be papers that are records. They say, Percnon gibbesi is in this plane, is the first time it's reported here. So it doesn't have any other information usually other than we found this species here for the first time. And the majority of the papers after that are in that category. They're just reports. In fact, 70% of the literature on this species are just pure reports. And we are working on generating more data on their biology and ecology. So we are working on something that is very basic, but is very important when you study invasive species, which is abundance. How many are there? There was a paper published by Salud Deudero in 2003 in Dragonera, and they measured several locations around Dragonera, and they found an abundance of 2 individuals per 100 square meters. And then we published this paper, and we measured 20 years later, and we have data from 2 locations, from Estellencs and Port of Valdemosa, and the abundance have multiplied by 30. So now we found an average of more than 60 individuals per 100 square meters, which indicates that probably this invasion is in the boom phase. We don't know if they reach the peak, but they are in the increasing phase. And the other thing also is that there's quite a lot of variability between the two sites that we measure, and also Salud in that island, well, in Dragonera, found also quite a lot of variability. So we increased the effort for abundance, and we are measuring we have been trying to portray the whole Mediterranean. So we have a survey in 5 different regions. Here, all these dots, I don't know if you see them from the back, not even if you see them from here, but all these dots indicate surveys, where we did surveys, total of 70 locations across the Mediterranean. And and we will add 10 more sites in Catalonia on next week, and then this effort will be done. But yeah, I have some analysis of the preliminary data for these surveys. We also measure in the 2 different habitats: artificial jetties, ports, rockies, because they are abundant there, but also in the natural rocky habitats, that is their natural habitat, to see if there's any preference between one habitat and the other. And these are the results. These are the name of the locations. In blue is represented the artificial structures, and in green is the natural. And then they are clustered in the 5 different areas, and this one is the Balearic Islands. So we found, again, a lot of variability, not similar numbers across sites. And the mean abundance is 33 individuals. So for the Mediterranean as a whole, that would be the number that we would estimate as the average that you could find. And then we found significantly more crabs in the artificial structures, 43 individuals per 100 square meters, compared with the natural ones. So they are more abundant in this more than twice the abundance in the artificial structures, which they could be facilitating this invasion. We also went over their native range distribution, because this is what it was cited in a lot of all the papers, but Daniel was tracking down where this citation came from, and we couldn't find exactly how they came up with this distribution. So we went to iNaturalist and JBIF to look for the citations that they had pictures on some way to identify that they were citing this species, the Percnon. And then these are the ones that we could check. And then we found that for the Pacific, the ones that are in blue, it was actually misidentified with a species that is similar, but not that similar. I think you can see the difference they have. Like, it's a Percnon sinensis, and it has like this white blocks in the legs, and also it's a little bit different. Also, this white thing, it's a different species than the one we have here. So it's actually an Atlantic species. There was also a citation in South Africa, but it wasn't actually a good citation. I don't remember exactly why. But we conclude that this species, it has a tropical and subtropical Atlantic distribution. So this is what we have here in the Mediterranean. And with regard to the diet, we are also doing, along with also Daniel, but along also with Hilmar, we are doing a review of all the literature, including the information that we are collecting. And it is a herbivorous, mainly herbivorous species. They did this study in Algeria, and they found that 94% of their stomach contents are microphytes, and the other 6% are animals, sand or plastic that we think they ingest as they are consuming the other algae. but this needs to be studied a little bit more on detail, but mainly herbivores. And then if you look at the macrophytes, the majority are algae, 97%, 3% are seagrasses, and within the algae group, that is their big bulk of their data, the majority, 65%, are red algae, followed by green algae and then brown algae. But then we put together all the species that have been either found on their stomachs or reported to be feeding in the field or reported to be feeding in the lab, and it sums up to 38 species, so quite a generalist, but also it could be potentially quite impactful because it can feed almost on anything, any macrophyte. And within this list, this paper by Bada, they reported, I don't know if you can see it here, but here it says Posidonia oceanica, this circle in red. Daniel was starting his master, and this paper was published, and then we saw this, and they said that it was in the paper, they said that it was detrital leaves of Posidonia oceanica, but these are stomach contents that they are usually quite digested. And we thought that maybe it was actually leaves that they were alive in the Posidonia shoots. So then we decided for his master's to test if this crab actually is feeding on alive Posidonia and not only on the detrital leaves in the shore. So we did an experiment where we actually put crabs in cages with either fruits of Posidonia, because at the time when we set up the experiment, there were also fruits, and we wanted to see, usually the fruits are the tissue from Posidonia that is more readily ingested. The leaves of 3 different types, the youngest, the second youngest, and also the oldest from the shoots, and also we put the basal rhizome because that's where probably the crabs are going to be around in the Posidonia. And then we repeat the experiment at 2 different temperatures, and we found incidence of herbivory in the 3 tissues. So they feed actively on the tissues of live Posidonia. We found that more herbivory on the fruits and on the rhizomes than on the leaves, which actually we expected fruits, leaves, and rhizomes, but the leaves are not their preferred thing. And this is actually quite surprising because in the stomachs of the crabs, in the paper by Bada, they found that in the fall and in the winter, an average of close to 15% of the stomach was leaves of Posidonia. So this paper was published in the beginning of this year, and it got quite a lot of media attention because it's Posidonia and it's a new threat of Posidonia. So we got we went to the TV came here, we went to the radio and several programs, and it also got more attention that we have liked. We got a rebuttal letter criticizing also the paper, and these are the authors. And their main criticism is one, that Posidonia oceanica and Percnon gibbesi don't share the same depth, so they are not going to be interacting with each other, and also that we did not perform a feeding preference experiment, and that invalidates our results. And we are responding. We have the chance to respond to this letter, and they publish them simultaneously. So they give you the chance, and then you can respond to the criticism. So to their first criticism, that they are not in the same depth, it's true that Percnon doesn't go to 45 meters, and you can find Posidonia up to those depths. So, and we said, we stated that in the paper, that is on the shallow range of Posidonia. And in our response, we also document several pictures that we took when we were doing these surveys in the Mediterranean. In some locations, for instance, this was in Crete, Posidonia patches were surrounded by rocks where there were crabs, and they were very abundant on those locations, and the Posidonia were close to 0.5 meter depth. Some other places, like here in Illetes, also is very rocky, and the Posidonia you have in there, you can see it actually, that sometimes you get the leaves to the water, like the zero. So they do share a range. They don't share all the range of depth of Posidonia, but it could have an impact on those shallow depths. The second is that we didn't perform a feeding preference experiment, but we didn't want to see if they prefer Posidonia over other things. We wanted to see if they actually feed on Posidonia. That was our question. Do they feed on Posidonia? Because maybe if we give them something that it was more preferential, they were going to be feeding on that thing, and then we will not know if they are feeding. So they do feed on Posidonia, and that was the main objective. And then after that, you can follow up with like other preferential experiments. And also with our experiment, also we saw that they not only feed on the leaves, but they also feed on fruits and rhizomes, which is quite worrisome. Not only feeding on the leaves. So they declared that the interaction was ecologically irrelevant, but we think that declaring this ecologically irrelevant without more field data is premature, and we actually call for further research to try to bring more light into this interaction, because it's at the whole scale of the Posidonia oceanica distribution. So more needs to be done. Now I'm going to switch gears to another experiment that we did with algae. We know that they feed a lot of algae, so in this one we did actually a feeding preference experiment, because we wanted to know of the algae that they are presented during the summer, if they had any preferences on those. So we used 6 species of algae, and we have one red algae. I'm not going to go over the species. If you want more details, and you can also not read it here, but one is a red algae, 3 are green, 2 of the green are invasive, well, exotic, 1 invasive and 1 is exotic, and then 2 brown, and then ulva. So what we found on this experiment, we offered the 6 species, and then before and after, we measured the weight, and then we calculated the consumption. And we saw that they have preference for 3 species, and they are like, one is invasive and is green, the other one is brown, the other one is red. So we can actually do not know exactly what their preferences for these big groups are, but they do have preferences for some species. But also we found that they feed in all the species. They feed less on some of them, but they still feed on them. And they ingest 70% of the crabs they ingest per day, 70% of their weight, which is a really high metabolic rate comparable to other animals that they have outstanding metabolic rates, like hummingbirds or musarañas, shrews. I don't know how it's pronounced, but yes, high metabolic rates. And then using the data that we obtain in the field, 6 individuals per 100 meters square, we calculated a daily consumption rate of 23 kilograms of macroalgae per hectare per day, with this average number of crabs, which represents all of this is potential ingestion based on data from the field and from the experiment, but represents 5% of the production of the algae in the rocky Mediterranean. And 5% doesn't seem a lot, but if you compare with Paracentrotus lividus, which is the other benthic herbivore in this habitat, and is the main benthic herbivore in this habitat, is below that number, is 4.4%. So actually quite a herbivore that we have there. We put together the data from the experiment with Posidonia and the experiment that we had with the algae, and we offer this algae all together, so we have added up the consumption, so they consume way more algae, and this is where the impact is probably going to be. We don't know what happened with the other seagrasses, with Cymodocea, for instance, but it seems like they consume 200 less portion of leaves that they do on macroalgae, and 30 times less on the fruits. So potentially less impact. The issue, and we also identified, we included this data in the response to the rebuttal letter. The issue is Posidonia is a perennial species, and all these algae that we are showing here are in the summer. So when they reported that Posidonia was in their stomachs, it was in the fall and in the winter, and that is when most of these algae are not there. So they may switch, and the impact may occur on that time of the year where Posidonia is available and other things may not be. So now we are starting with Silvia Paoletti, that started her PhD, and part of her PhD is focusing on Percnon, and in collaboration and guidance of Hilmar, we are doing this experiment that is, well, it's not an experiment, it's a project that is trying to assess actually the realized impact. So the impact that we are calculating now is potential because it's in the lab and we don't know exactly what is happening in the field. So this is an attempt to measure what are the crabs doing in the field. So we can measure their closer to a real impact, but also what effect the habitat complexity may have on their abundances, and also to have a more accurate number of their densities, because all the densities that we have been collecting are surveys that we do visual counts in transits, which is very, very common. But with this one, we have cameras that are recording 24 hours. They record also at night, but we cannot see the crabs, but we can see them at dawn and dusk, and also we can get a frame with a maximum number of crabs per frame. And we are using artificial intelligence and the aid of the data lab, and also 3D photogrammetry. We have two plots of 150 square meters, and we do 3D images. And then on those larger plots, we have like a smaller plot where we set the cameras, and the cameras cover 1.5 square meters for these 24 hours. And these surveys are seasonal, so here in the x-axis is the time, and in the y-axis is the temperature and the light, and also this line will represent the algae pickup in the beginning of the spring. So we are hoping to catch a little bit more just than one annual cycle. And this is how the 3D image looked. So we can actually get fine details of the complexity of the habitat. And also we can see how the algae, because we compare through time, so we can see changes in time on the algae. And then these are the cameras. They are GoPros with an additional battery, so they can run for 24 hours, and they are set. And then this will be the crab. This is where the cameras are constantly recording in the 24 hours. We also do visual transits that are similar to the ones that we did in the Mediterranean, to be able to compare the numbers with the numbers that we get here with that method. And this is how the data lab is recording. Like, some of them are very clear like this for us, that it says 81%, but this is clearly a crab. So we have been training the algorithm to identify the crabs. Yeah, and I'm going to move just quickly to the next step. We still have a little bit more than 2 years to go, and we want to investigate interactions with other herbivores, maybe potential competitions, whether food or space, because they occupy similar niches. We also want to get into predation on Percnon, identify the predators of Percnon, which ones are there, and what are the predation rates, how many crabs are they removing, and also potential trophic cascades. So it could be direct trophic cascades due to predation on the crabs and then less feeding on the algae, but also indirect cascades, because the crabs, they may change their behavior depending on the presence of predators. And then there's nothing done with managing this invasion so far. So we want to start this part of maybe the management. We remove biological control or chemical control from the from the potential options because they can have pretty bad collateral impacts. But the physical control or manual removal of the crabs is a potential option. The only thing is that it's very labor intensive. We go there, we catch them, it takes a big effort. So we are going to explore alternatives of catching the crabs, maybe with crab pots or something a little bit more creative. We are in touch with an artisanal fisherman, and we are going to explore the option of actually removing the large number of crabs, hopefully. Valorization of the species would be ideal, whether creation of fisheries, but this is a small crab, so that is likely a no. But it could be used as bait, and in the Canary Islands, they are actually caught for bait, so that could be an option, also for compost. And we were in contact at the beginning of the project with the Marilles Foundation to actually maybe explore the possibility of creating rallies to remove the crabs from an area, and then but they asked me that they wanted to see more data on the impact because they said that they weren't convinced that it was going to be an impactful species. So now I have data, so I will follow up on a conversation, and maybe we will start with smaller scale rallies involving like citizen scientists. So as a conclusion for the talk, is a widespread distribution, whole Mediterranean, and expanding, occupying all those areas that are left and not invaded, high densities, and from the data that we have, increasing densities, probably in the boom phase, but we don't know exactly where in that boom phase. Habitat preference for artificial rocky sites, and large direct potential ecological impact on several species. High grazing rates, also this potential large impact is because the grazing rates are high, but also because they can affect many species. We have counted 38, but there's probably way many more. Indirect ecological effects are unknown. We will search for data on other herbivores and predators. No management efforts have been performed, but we hope to start those, or somebody else with that will start with those. And then more results will come up in 2 years. And just wrapping up, I started with like these invasions are increasing. They are a huge actor on global change. They cost money, but in the marine realm, not that much information. Another invasive species that is a big problem in the Balearic Islands, the raccoon. Again, same issue. A lot of them difficult to catch, difficult to eradicate, and barely any information. So yes, in order to be able to manage these species and to know them, we have to study them. We have to make the effort. And so the people behind that effort, collecting all this data, and we are all very thankful to the funding agencies that allow us to do our job.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Any questions?
I have a quick question to that graph you showed with the incrementing invasions.
Yeah.
There are some gray foils where that seems to crash.
Yeah.
Why?
So that data, they put it in white because they said that it was unreliable data that they couldn't in the last years. I'm not sure, I don't remember. And I actually thought like I have to check for the explanation why they changed those dots and they put them in white. But then they have follow-up papers on this one. This one is from 2017.
Continues to increase.
Yeah. I think like is in some areas is a plateau. This is just like the global, the general, but in some areas is in some taxa is actually plateauing. Yeah, but still, even if it plateau, it's fresh new records, huh?
Or is it to do with the people not publishing these things anymore? And it's just like
No, I will come back to that paper and yeah and
it's weird, because
yeah.
see that crashing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Very nice talk. Do you have any idea why they prefer the artificial rocky
Hmm.
habitats?
So we have to analyze the data a little bit more on detail. It doesn't seem that is all the artificial habitats. It's certain artificial habitats. And those are the ones that are getting really big numbers. And these habitats are the ones that they don't have these blocks that are cubes, not those. These are the ones that are like big rocks that are very similar, that they create these crevices. That is, I think that's what they like. They like, and this is one of the things that we are trying to figure with the stuff that we are doing in the field, because it needs to be areas where they can come in and out and there's algae, but that other, I assume, predators or other species cannot go there easily and catch them because they are kind of like trapped. So it's these cracks, but I'm not sure exactly why those cracks, but it's just like a certain type of, yeah. So that's on those parts where you get like really, really big numbers. Yeah.
I was wondering, when do invasive species become endemic? Eventually, right? And maybe not on these time scales, but overall, over the course of the history, biological history of the Earth, there have been a lot of cases in which ecosystems have changed, right? And then the things that you see now, the endemic species you see now, evolved from probably some species that have invaded.
Yeah.
Right, so at a certain point, there's going to be an adaptation of the ecosystem, I guess,
Yeah.
in which this new species becomes endemic. So what conditions must happen in order for this new species to actually become, let's say, quote unquote, a natural part of the ecosystem?
So, like an example would be the cat or the dingo in Australia. They don't become like, you get used to them. They are still exotic and invasive. It doesn't matter how long it takes. It can take like 2,000 years. Yeah, they have been there for 2,000 years. And some people would say, well, now they are almost from here. We have cats here, but they are not from here. They are an invasive species, and the damage that they cause is considered. So some of them are more recent, some of them are not. But if the introduction is a human, it is an anthropogenic factor, then they are considered exotic. And the expiration, I don't know, the dingo is not considered. It has been, I think it's 9,000 years in Australia. And then some people start considering, it's just like, well, but it has been here so long. It's a little bit of a debate, I say, within the invasive species, no? Wouldn't you say?
I don't know, this is not my field.
No, I was looking at Amparo, that she was with some of them.
I was thinking of some species that like trees or so that have been naturalized, but they're not from here. For example, the crops that we have, like some of the crops, like carrot trees or so, that you can well say that they are like Mediterranean, but they are actually not from here. But it's like if they are, because they are naturalized. But it is a tricky question,
Yeah.
I think. It is not just a single
It's a little bit of
easy
a
answer,
construct.
because it depends. In general, if it's introduced by humans,
Then it's categorized that way.
yeah.
And then it gets that label. And now with ocean warming, it becomes even more tricky because some species actually can get there, but warming is anthropogenic, but they are actually not being transported by humans. It's just that they can expand their native ranges because it's suitable. So yeah, it's quite, yeah. It's a heated debate because even some people consider that invasive species shouldn't be categorized as invasive and they should be just like treated as native. So yeah.
Is the artificial man used for bait or anything? Do they need permits or something to use them? Because it's a marine species, invasive species.
So that is a part of the valorization of a species, that first you do the research and then you have, in the case of Percnon in Spain is invasive, but in Italy, which is very abundant, or in Greece, is not invasive, it's exotic. So you don't need a permit, or you need a permit like any other species. In Spain, you would, because it's in the list of invasive species in the ministerium. So you would have to prove that you can use it as a bait and that it works, removing them for baits, and then they will have to work the legislation and the permits for collecting them. But we are very, very far from that, yeah.
I have many questions because it's super interesting topic. Yeah, the last one I thought about is, have you considered the possible impacts of the activity of removing them? Because as they are in very, I mean, they are in hidden places, they are difficult to find. I know if like a lot of people just maybe taking boulders,
Yeah.
very low, can have more effect or more impact than
On other
drugs.
things, right? Yeah. Including the person that is.
Yeah, no,
no,
no, I mean the impact of the person, of
Yeah.
people just
Yeah.
trampling and moving rocks and scratching to catch them when they inside a rock. Or,
Yeah.
because I mean, I think it's very hard. What I have seen when I'm doing snorkeling is that
They are quick.
possible. Yeah,
They
they
are
are very
quick.
quick and very.
Yeah. Yeah. I think rallies would be good to try, but I think even if the rally goes really well, yes, you have other impacts like that, like you have to leave the rocks, or you are very skillful, like we grab them with the hands. Yeah, and also I don't think we will be able to remove the majority of them, but it would be good. Same thing with lionfish. They did tons of rallies. It was very hard to eradicate them all because they are also hiding now in the reef. But it's also good to make those efforts and then follow up on those populations. So I think that would be, but I don't think it will be easy. And I also think it will be a lot of breaking the crabs, and for citizen scientists, sometimes it's a little bit traumatic because they still see the animal, and even if they think it's an invasive species, they feel bad because you just rip them apart. So yeah.
Okay. Any other question? So we can leave it here. Thank you very much.